Public hearings into the National Prosecuting Authority Bill, or on the National Prosecuting Authority Bill, have begun today. The bill will see the establishment of the Investigative Directorate against corruption. Well, civil society groups, including Corruption Watch, the Helen Suzman Foundation, and Open Secrets, took part in today's meeting where they made presentations to the Justice and Correctional Services Portfolio Committee. Well, Open Secrets says it's concerned about the operational and financial independence of the new body. For more on this, let's speak to Luthando Vilakazi, who's a lawyer with Open Secrets. A very good evening to you, Luthando. Good to talk to you. Let's talk about these concerns firstly and how you laid them out before the committee today.
Thanks so much for having me. So there's concerns that go to the structural issues around the NPA in the Constitution, and then there's concerns with the bill itself. Unfortunately, we feel that the bill is a missed opportunity to address many issues that are in the setup of the NPA as an institution. Unfortunately, our Constitution has placed overall control of the NPA in the minister. And what that means is that the minister is the one in charge of assigning and appointing prosecutors and the NDPP, as well as being in charge of how the NPA gets its budget. And that is something that comes back down into the primary legislation as it is. What the bill does is establish an investigative directorate that deals specifically with corruption. But the NPA's mandate is not only dedicated to corruption, and these structural issues are not addressed effectively in the bill. Some of our submissions that we highlighted in terms of the bill itself relate to the fact that it again repeats this issue of independence, which we feel allows for political interference between the executive and the NPA. The oversight mechanism that is outlined in the bill requires that the minister appoint a retired judge to an ombud that is established. But that oversight role that the minister plays, unfortunately, again, allows for a space where there's political interference, especially in circumstances where any member of the executive, including the minister himself, may be subject to the oversight mechanism. Another thing that we feel the bill fails to do is effectively describe the scope of this new investigative directorate against corruption. And what that means is that the jurisdiction of the investigators is not clear. And that also means that there's no clear basis on which the NPA interacts with the Special Investigative Unit and the Hawks. And the last of main point that we raised today in our submissions is that there's a lack of clarity on investigators' policing powers, which means that it's harder for us to be able to go for transparency and ensure that there is accountability and hold members of the NPA to account within the investigative directorate. But if I could just emphasize that yes, sorry.
If I may come in there, Luthando, because you've outlined quite a number of things, and I want us to go through some of them perhaps item by item. And I want to start with the issue of political interference, because you mentioned that right at the top of your response. How or what are the alternatives to minimize or remove altogether, if that's even possible, the threat of political interference with this directorate?
Absolutely. It's something that I think all of us as South Africans are concerned with, especially in the advent of the Zondo Commission on State Capture. There are many things that could be done. Some of them are achievable, some of them are not. First prize would be an amendment to the Constitution in order to remove the role of the minister exercising ultimate control over the NPA and allow for the NPA to make its own budgetary vote in Parliament. But the processes that would require a constitutional amendment are not going to serve our interests now, because our ability to address corruption in the NPA is urgent.
And on that then, you spoke, for example, about the lack of clarity around the scope of this envisaged directorate. What do you think that scope should be? How far should it go?
Well, the scope should be able to outline quite clearly its powers in relation to tackling corruption. There should be security of tenure of investigators. There needs to be clear resourcing of staff members and research capacity. It's essentially addressing the issues that the NPA itself has highlighted as limitations and issues that have prevented them from pursuing state capture cases effectively. That scope can include recommendations from the Zondo Commission, as well as recommendations that have come out of civil society organizations in the submissions. But it's really important that whatever it is, it must be clear.
And that brings me to another issue that you mentioned around, for example, the policing powers of the investigators. There's been a lot of criticism, as we know, especially around the lack of progress in investigating and dealing with high-profile cases, not least of which those related to the state capture years. The Gupta brothers' names also come up quite often when people lament that lack of progress. How much policing powers should the investigators be given, and what does that give us in terms of some sense of surety that the entity, the Directorate, would then be able to function optimally and meet its objectives?
Absolutely. I think that we have a lot of jurisprudence that we can draw from at international standards. And international instruments make very clear the point at which we want investigators to be able to do their job effectively by exercising police powers, but not in such a way where it encroaches on the rights of persons who have been accused and for South Africans in general. So it's about striking a balance, and it's about making sure that they're able to conduct their investigations effectively so that we don't have a Nulane situation as we saw earlier this year. And it's really important for it to be clearly outlined so that investigators themselves have a standard that they can meet in order to ensure that chains of evidence are not compromised, to ensure that they're able to conduct search warrants with the purpose to achieving a complete and full investigation.
And of course, your organization, Luthando, was among several who were making these presentations to Parliament today. I wonder, from the scope, having looked at what your colleagues also presented, how divergent are the views on the idea of the Directorate and what we've just been speaking about tonight, the issue of shielding it from political interference, making sure that those who are employed by the Directorate have enough powers to be able to do their work effectively, etc.?
So the resounding call from civil society in terms of what we saw today is that independence is of the utmost importance. Regardless of whether the constitutional framework may not be the best set up and the primary legislation as it is may not be the setup that we want, there are ways for us to make for an independent NPA that is not only actually independent through its budgetary and appointments processes, but it's really important that it's perceived as independent as well. It doesn't help for us to do all of these amendments, and we as the South African people do not have faith in the NPA's independence.
Good to speak to you, Luthando Vilakazi. An interesting process to watch going forward. Luthando is a lawyer with Open Secrets. Thank you for your time tonight.